Hello, fellow travelers, and welcome to another episode of Vertical Stars Podcast fourth season. My loyal listeners, thank you for continued support. Enjoy this amazing interview with legendary writer Steve Englehart. You know him from his classic runs on Batman, Captain America, and many more. Now come on board as we go traversing the stars. Hi, Mr. Englehart. Thank you for coming to Vertical Stars Podcast.
Hi, nice to be here.
Well, my pleasure. As one of the great legends of the comic book industry, I always want to ask a question of inspiration. So, inspire your love for comics and who are your earliest influences?
Well, I think both of those can be answered. I loved mysteries and I loved a good dark ink line. And so I was a big fan of Dick Tracy
Hmm.
with his weird villains, which went along with a big fan of Batman with his weird villains and occasional really good art. And also the Mickey Mouse mysteries in the back of Walt Disney's comics and stories. They were simple, but they were fun and they had a really good ink line. So those are the things. And the ducks, of course. Sorry, Carl Barks, in the front of Walt Disney comics and stories, which were a thing in and of themselves. But in general, mysteries and dark line.
Hmm. Well, I think one thing I was reading a little bit on your backstory, and I read you had a degree in psychology, and as we'll go into from Wesleyan University, and as we'll go a little bit later, you also have a experience as a journalist. So when I'm thinking psychology, I'm thinking journalism. Connect that to being a great comic book writer. How do they kind of like merge into that?
By accident, really. I was mostly interested as a comic book fan. I was mostly interested in art because I was growing up in the 50s and all you really had in terms of superheroes were Superman and Batman and Wonder
Mm,
Woman was off to the side and the Martian Manhunter was off to even more off to the side. Um, some of them had good art, but very few of them had good stories. They were very
mm.
serviceable, they were solid, they hit all their marks, but there was nothing. I was more interested in the art than in the stories. My father was a newspaper reporter, so apparently I got those genes, but I was not thinking about writing at all. And then through a long, convoluted series of events where I just happened to be in the right place at the right time, I ended up as a editorial assistant, low-level editor at Marvel, and was offered a chance to write something and did and liked writing it and they liked what I wrote, so then they started offering me more and more, and eventually that led to being a comic book writer. But and the art just sort of got forgotten because I filled up all my time doing the writing.
Now, when you think about your experience as a psychologist, right? And you're obviously applying it or psychology.
Well, yeah, I got a degree.
Right.
I never practiced psychology,
So,
no.
but the education that you got from that is understanding psychology more helpful writing your heroes or your villains?
I think everybody. I
Hmm.
mean, the reason that I studied psychology, I was interested in why people do what they do. And I was looking for one answer. I learned that there's 30 answers depending on which psychologist you want to, follow. Um, but in writing all those different characters, I mean, I have a facility, I think, for sort of getting inside each one's head, looking out through each one's eyes, which is related to, connected to all of that. But
Hmm.
um, I just whether you're a hero or a villain, you're an interesting person one way or another.
Hmm.
And so I mean, I've done Captain America and I've done the Joker. I mean,
Hmm.
they're both interesting. They're just different.
So again, thinking about intern psychology, which I'm just fascinated by. Um, how much real world psychology do you apply to fictional characters like these? I mean, do you view them as if they were real, or is it these are not cartoon characters, but these are combo characters, so you can't hold quite as true to psychology as you would with.
Well, I mean, I don't sit there and say, okay, based on my psychology, this is what would happen, but that's all sort of built in at this
Mm,
time. So when I'm shaping these guys, I sort of have a sense of what should happen and what shouldn't happen. Um, but I do take them as real while I'm writing them. I mean, not that I really believe Captain America really exists, but when I'm writing Captain America, I am trying to be as true as possible to that character, to that guy, and trying to have him react or act in a way that is psychologically consistent, but also, you know, heroic and interesting to read about, But I mean, it's all just part and parcel of putting it together.
Now, one thing that is definitely different now in comic books than it were in even the 90s, the 80s before, is nowadays most creators are not allowed to have long, enduring runs. Usually
Right.
15 issues, 20 if they're lucky, 30 if they're very successful, and then there's something's rebooted. What are you able to do with the longer runs that you had the opportunity to write that maybe modern writers don't have the opportunity for because they are stuck with shorter or have the mindset of shorter runs?
Well, I was able to have sort of a long-term development of the characters. As long as I could find something new to do with them,
Hmm.
that's what I wanted to do. I really have not been involved in the comic book business for 20 years now, oddly enough. Um, I am talking to a company that I don't need to name because it's still way too early, but I'm already running into the levels of bureaucracy and editorials and merchandising and scheduling and so forth that were not part of, when I did it. Um, Again, Roy Thomas came to me and said, I'm giving you Captain America to write.
Hmm.
End of story. If I were given Captain America today, there would be a whole bunch of editors. There'd be the whole Disney pantheon. Everybody, he's now a commodity. Um, but when I wrote him, he was just, a character. So,
Because I think, I mean, once again, it's perception maybe versus the reality, but perception of writing today seems to be a lot of you're writing for a trade, usually 5 issues, or you're writing a run that you just assume to be, like I said, shorter run. Where
yeah.
where's the where there's discussion with you when you were taking on a title that'd be like, hey, keep in mind we'll give you this many issues or this, or was it just to your, keep going until you stop?
Yeah, keep going. I mean, the history, I was there 10 years after Marvel got started, right? So I was still writing the same characters that Stan and Roy and other people had written. And Stan had written 125 issues of the Fantastic Four, and the rest of
Hmm.
that, they the experience, the expectation at Marvel was if you got a series, you were just on it indefinitely until, I mean, the two things that had to happen was you had to turn it in on time every month and you had to make it sell.
Hmm.
And if you could do that, then that's all they cared about. So, um, longevity was nobody even thought about that. I mean, I over at various times over my career, I would quit to go someplace else because I was unhappy with what was going on. But if I hadn't quit, I would have just kept going. I mean,
Hmm.
I did bring Captain America to an end, my run on it, because I felt I'd said everything that I needed to say there. So it is, at some point on other books, I might have said, oh, well, that wraps me up and we'll hand it off to somebody else. But in general, my expectation, everybody's expectation was that I was just going to write it until I didn't.
Now, when you're saying one of the basic rule is set be on time and also like I said make it sell. I do think currently make it sell usually means like event books, big things.
All right.
What did make it sell mean for when you were writing?
Well, we sold on newsstands back then. I mean, comics were readily available without comic book stores. I have no problem with comic book stores, but I mean, in those days, comics were just on the newsstand next to Time and Life and, TV Guide, whatever else was out there. So and then newsstands were everywhere because people were, that's what people did. So, pretty much any Marvel book sold 750,000 to 1 million copies. And if it did better than that, great. 350,000 was basically the cutoff point. If things got down near that, then the book might be in trouble. So sales just meant sales. Again, when I took over Captain America, the book was failing. It was getting down toward 350 because, well, I mean, what I figured out was it was because they were billing him as the living legend of World War II. Nobody cared about World War II. Nobody cared about war during Vietnam. It wasn't there. I'm the guy who switched it over to he stands for American ideals. And that, when I did that, and I'm just reporting the facts here, but when I did that, it went from a book that was facing cancellation to the number one title in 6 months because you could do that. The sales were monthly. They were, everybody had a chance at them. Um, it wasn't, you didn't just order. I mean, these days people order just enough for the people they know they can sell them to. They cost a whole lot more. I mean, there's a lot more between the impulse to read that comic and getting that comic. Um, but it was easy back then, and so sales just meant, anything, I guess, better than 350,000. But I mean, generally, as I say, things were mostly more like a million or even more.
Now it's kind of interesting. Or when your run of Captain America was a very famous run, written during a very particular moment in our history, this a very political moment in history,
Mm,
um, the 70s, Nixon, things of that nature. You took some big risks, I feel, I would imagine, with Captain America, with the idea of Nomad, the insinuation of Nixon, not even though you didn't actually use Nixon. Um, did you feel that was a risk at the time? Did you feel like that was just your voice needed to be heard? Or did you feel like this would draw interest?
numbers two and three, I think. I mean, I felt we seem to be concentrating on Captain America here, but I mean, um, so I had established that he cared about America's ideals, and then here comes the president being a crook, and I just could not see how this guy, who I believe in his world, which is supposed to be our world,
Hmm.
would ignore this, right? Would go on about fighting supervillains and not have any reaction to the fact that the president was a crook. Um, I had put myself on that path, American ideals, and so it just seemed very logical that there would be some sort of sequence about Watergate. Um, when I started it, nobody knew how long the Watergate hearings were going to go on. Nobody knew how it was going to turn out. Um, as the hearings went along, it became clearer how it was going to turn out.
Hmm.
Nixon held on as long as he could, but I was doing my analog of the whole thing so that Captain America could respond to the vibe. Um, and when that story came to an end, Nixon was still the president. It was very clear by that time that he was not going to be for much longer. But
Hmm.
um, it was my decision. I can't say this is Nixon
Hmm.
because the guy blows his brains out, and it's like I can't kill Nixon in a comic book when he's still the president. I mean, it just
Hmm.
didn't make sense from a reality standpoint, right? So I just did, yeah, and there was no editorial. Again, it was selling, people were buying it, and I don't mean to make Marvel sound completely mercenary, but a good part of being in business is being mercenary, and that was, they wanted their books to sell, and if they were selling, then they were good with that.
Now, I'm obviously, as you said, we're talking about Captain America, but I do have questions for some of the other character, for a lot of the other characters as well. But since we're all in Captain America, I think it brings up an interesting idea of how he's how to portray him properly, which I think you did a great job with. Do you find that he's better portrayed as a symbol of America or a symbol of what America we want America to be?
Yeah, what America should be. That is what he's no longer tied to whether you like Trump or not. He's
Hmm.
not tied to whether you like Biden or not. It's like he represents the stuff that they taught us in school about American ideals, that,
Hmm.
all the American stories that we all hear about what America is. Um, So, I mean, that was the secret of his success in that regard, that I got him off of being identified with any particular war and just, he moved on to standing for the image, the vibe, the feeling of America.
And like I said, I think that, like I said, is one of the most famous storylines with him as Nomad and everything. That was absolutely terrific. Another thing I thought was kind of interesting is that once again, you worked with a lot of other big people in the name of comic books, Neil Adams, Denny O'Neil, Gardner Fox. So what did they kind of impart toward to you to about comic books and writing?
Well, mostly among those people, I would list Neil, and Neil and I were still doing art together when I was working with him. But Neil was a storyteller and would as he was teaching me art, working with me on art, he was still doing his regular comic books, and he would comment on scripts about you can't this makes no sense, you can't do this, and so Neil, drew photorealistically.
Mhm.
And I think he looked at the world sort of photorealistically, that it was, he wanted to get it right. And so in those days, he was just a tremendous guy. And I was very happy to be working with him and hearing his theories of comics and so forth while I was doing that. I mean, it really set me up in that when we did the story together, which was in Vampirella magazine, it wasn't a Vampirella story, but it was in the magazine. He insisted that my name be on it as, Neil Adams and Steve Englehart. Nobody credits their assistants. It just, that's not a thing. But he wanted to get my name published so I'd have something when I came to New York to get into the business full time. And that's the kind of guy he was. But also, he was thinking ahead. He was thinking, well, how is this going to work, and how is Steve going to, be able to function after he stops working with me and so forth. I mean, it was just the sort of calm understanding of things and thinking about the future. All that stuff was useful to me, I mean, just sort of absorbing that vibe. Not, it's not like I could say, oh, he's taught me this thing and no, it was just the vibe of working with a guy who was that um professional and human, really.
Now, when you're looking at and you're included in what I would, these great names, as in like I said, Adams, you, Gardner Fox. When you're able to look at what you all accomplished, how and was there a common thread about your approach to storytelling that you could say is we all had this in common? This is why this is a thread of success because of how we approach comics.
I don't think so. No. I mean, there's there's boxes you have to check when you're writing comics. I mean, you want them to be exciting, you want them to be colorful, you want people to pay money for them. Sorry. And I mean, it's got to be a comic book, right? It's got to be
Mhm.
something that readers will recognize as a comic book. But, Gardner Fox came from an era when Julie Schwartz, the editor, would say, I have an idea for a cool cover. Now, Gardner, you come up with a story that fits that cover, right? And Julie was a great guy. I mean, that's just how he operated in an earlier time.
Yeah.
Um, so Denny was, his own guy, but he was doing DC stuff primarily, which has a different vibe from Marvel stuff. I mean, and I've always said when I started writing the Avengers after Roy, I thought Roy's Avengers was like the best book that Marvel had, and then all of a sudden I was doing it. And for the first 6 months, I sort of had Roy stories in my head. I was trying to, get that same vibe that
Yeah.
Roy, and then through a series of circumstances, basically the Avengers Defenders War thing, it I slipped over to writing my stories, things that sounded right to me without having to sound like somebody else.
Hmm.
I think everybody, I mean, and I even encourage it. I think when people get started doing anything, paying attention to what's been done and taking your best shot at, doing your version of what's been done better than just sort of saying, I'm not going to pay any attention to what's happened. I'm just going to, let it spring directly from my genius brain. Um, so, but, hopefully after you've, and Neil used to say, just, swipe, just, do your own take on it, but just, it's there. And if it looks good to you, then do that. Um, uh, so I don't know. I think that I write like me now. I mean,
Hmm.
and for a long time I've written like me. Um, and I don't, I can't point at anybody and say, "Oh yeah, I'm a clone of that guy," or, whatever.
Well, moving on to a little bit to Green Lantern, which I usually brag on my interviews when I talk about Green Lantern that I have every single Green Lantern comic book from back from the second issue of his second appearance in Showcase all the way to now and everything. So I'm a big Green Lantern fan.
Me too.
And talking about Neil Adams and Daniel O'Neill, obviously they wrote a very famous run of Green Lantern, one of place and Green Arrow, especially where they introduced John Stewart. One of your most famous comics that you wrote is very centered on John Stewart. Was there any ever conversation with them about the character? And did that connect you to what you were going to do with your Green Lantern run?
Well, I mean, the Denny O'Neil, Neil Adams, Green Lantern, Green Arrow, John Stewart was, a very militant black man, whatever. And by the time I came along 10 years later or whatever it was to write Green Lantern myself, he'd had a lot of those edges taken off. But when I came in, he was the Green Lantern because Hal Jordan had quit, but everybody knew Hal Jordan was going to come back at some point. And every time that they'd done that sort of sequence before, Hal Jordan came back and John Stewart disappeared for the next 3 years, And I
Hmm.
thought, well, why, I like John Stewart. Why does John Stewart have to go away if I bring back Hal Jordan? Which led me then to why don't I do Guy Gardner? And then why don't I do the Green Lantern Corps with all these different Green Lanterns?
Hmm.
The idea that there could be more than one then just kind of spun out from there. But I did think, it's like I liked John Stewart, and I didn't see any reason why he always had to get pushed out when Hal Jordan came back. Why couldn't there be two of them? Was the initial thought.
Now, one of the biggest Green Lantern storylines, especially in that original 220 something run, include Green Lantern Corps, is that issue with John Stewart where he takes off his mask, reveals his
Hmm.
identity to the world. It's one of the, for at least in the world of, especially John Stewart, but in the world of Green Lantern, one of the most memorable single issues. When you decided to do that, did you realize just how big of a thing you were doing by having him reveal his identity?
Yes and no. I mean, it made sense that he would, and again, because he hadn't been the lead character. I mean, he was being the lead character at the moment in the book, but in general, he was considered, the backup Green Lantern. So, if Hal Jordan had said that, that would be a bigger deal in terms of comics. Um, but he was, he was, John Stewart was a sincere Green Lantern, but he was newer school than Hal Jordan was. And again, all this stuff just seems logical to me from looking at the character, from trying to
Hmm.
be John Stewart. What do we know about John Stewart? What have we seen him do? What's his mode of activity, that kind of thing. It seemed like the thing to do. And that's been my motif ever since Captain America, of like I let the characters tell me what they, who they are, what they're going to do, how do they react to things. I really do believe that. I find, if I say, oh, well, I'm going to do this story and it's going to go like this,
Hmm.
when I start to write the characters and they're reacting to each other in the moment and things are happening and all that, sometimes they just go off in a different direction. And if you try to force them back, it's going to look like you're forcing them back.
Hmm.
So I just let them go and adjust my parameters if I need to get to someplace 3 issues from now, I'm not taking the route I thought I was going to take, but I'll get there. I mean,
Hmm.
I can do that. But I never want to force a character to do something because of the plot. That kind of stuff drives me crazy because characters I'm all about characters, right? I really want those guys, every one of them, to be exactly who they're supposed to be, and then fit in with all the others who are being what they're supposed to be.
Now, I mean, obviously, John Stewart, for a lot of people, John Stewart is their Green Lantern.
Hmm.
Um, he's obviously going to be in the new Green Lantern TV show from HBO. He
Right.
made huge waves in the Justice League animated series in the late 90s. But I feel, and I'm pretty sure I'm positive, I'm right on this. His popularity stemmed from your run. That I feel like that defined him more than any other run. Would you agree on that one?
Well, I can't speak to everything that's been done, in the
Right.
last 20 years, for example. But no, I definitely wanted him to become an equal. I wanted him to be just as good a Green Lantern as Hal Jordan. And I do know that when they did the Justice League, they made him the Green Lantern and so forth. So yeah, I mean, I would take that, sure.
And I feel a lot of people, when they talk about John Stewart, they talk about there's kind of like two John Stewarts, the architect and the soldier. When you were thinking about John Stewart, where did you fall?
More of the soldier, I think. Um, I mean, I'm reminded, sorry, jumping sideways to Kilowog, that I made sure to say that Kilowog was an intelligent guy. He'd been an engineer, I think, something or other.
Hmm.
He looked like a big old hunk, but he was actually a smart guy. And over the years, they've sort of diminished that and made him more of a drill sergeant, big tough guy, you know, which was not the original point. So things do change, but I, and again, when you or I say soldier, again, I would substitute Green Lantern. But I don't see him so much. At least when I did him, I was not so much concerned with what he did when he wasn't being a Green Lantern.
Hmm.
Most of his storyline, again, was with Cap who I liked a lot and who they killed as soon as I was gone. Um, you know, um, uh, so it was more, he was definitely Green Lantern focused throughout my run.
And now another Green Lantern that I mean, I'm sure you know probably by saying this, you know where I'm going to go next. That I think was best defined in your iconic run is Guy Gardner. I mean, obviously he
Mm.
showed up in issue 59 of Green Lantern. He showed up in issue 116, but it wasn't until you grabbed Guy Gardner that he started becoming an actual character. Because the other ones were just like single appearances. He issue 59 is not anything like Guy Gardner whatsoever because he was basically just like another dude. But later on, you definitely could have did a finding depiction of the character. Can you kind of go into where you took where why you took Guy Gardner the way you where you did? Where did that come from? From where you saw him before? Um, yeah, let's start there.
Well, I was doing, again, I'm old school to think that when I take over a character, I'm supposed to like continue the character that exists, not just radically change him as a regular concept. But the history of Guy Gardner was that he was a regular dude who got hit by a bus and ended up in a mental hospital as a vegetable. And so after I said, why can't there be two Green Lanterns? Wait, there is a third one, but that guy is useless. I mean, he's a vegetable and he was never very interesting in the first place. So the idea of coming out of the mental hospital with a whole new mindset came in. And I wanted to do, since I mean, Hal Jordan is a down the road Green Lantern, and I was making John Stewart an equally good Green Lantern. So I thought a bad Green Lantern would be an interesting place to go because I basically had a blank slate with Guy Gardner. He was nobody, and it's like anything could come from that, and that's what I came to. Um, so I really liked the idea that this Green Lantern Corps, where they all seem to really pull for each other and so on and so forth, that there'd be this asshole involved in it too, you know?
I mean, but when you're thinking about Guy Gardner, did you at all view him as someone who was heroic, or is he more self-serving? Because I mean, he's an asshole, but on some level nowadays, now he kind of becomes like a lovable asshole versus earlier when he kind
Yeah.
of just an asshole.
Yeah, well, that happened with Star-Lord too. I mean, my original Star-Lord was a complete asshole, and he got the edges taken off of him over the time, and then he became who he became. Um, yeah, I always thought Guy Gardner was like a big adolescent. I mean, he just kind of like went for it, whatever it was that was, was gonna come up, and he could do good stuff. He even knew, what to do and why he would do it, but he wasn't subtle about things, and he would take offense easily, and he was always larger than larger than life in the room. But sure, he could be a good Green Lantern.
He's become a household name because of Superman, played by
Right.
Nathan Fillion. Um, how close did that big portrayal come to how you envisioned him when you were writing him?
Well, it's interesting because when I saw the Superman movie, I thought, he's a little bland. But then they did newspaper things saying, well, he was bland because he was in a PG movie. When he goes over to the Lantern series, he's going to be dropping F-bombs, So I think Guy Gardner gets played, appropriate to the story that he's in. And from what I understand, he's going to be kind of the through character that, we're going to see him in a lot of stuff. He's in Peacemaker too. He's in, I mean, and on beyond. So I think the idea at this point, and again, they don't consult me. I don't, all I
Hmm.
know is what I read in the paper and what I get from talking to people. Um, but I think uh, he will appear in a lot of things and be sort of different in every one of them. But I mean, I understand why he couldn't be any pricklier in the movie, in the Superman movie than he was. But that was my first reaction. Why isn't he pricklier?
Now, I mean, basically, your run is what defined Guy Gardner as a character. He did show up before, but on some level, like, should you have creator credit for that character then? Because you did define him.
Yes, that's an ongoing thing. Joe Staten and I mean, Joe came up with the costume. He's the only Green Lantern who doesn't wear the same costume as everybody else, right? I
Hmm.
mean, the bowl haircut, that was Joe, right? Here's a guy in an institution. He's just got this weird bowl haircut. So Joe and I, yes, we did that. And DC for 40 years said, well, you don't get any credit for this because you just took a pre-existing character and moved him along. And there's been an infinite number of arguments about this. I mean, it's like if you take a semi-popular Harley Quinn and make her extremely popular, did you do something different that you should get rewarded for, or did you just take a character that was already there and do a better job with it? Those are arguments that get had in various contexts, all around all the time. But our feeling is that our Guy Gardner is a completely different guy. We just replaced the guy who was there. We didn't,
Hmm.
take what was there and move it there. We just replaced it. Um, and so now, the finally after 40 years, they're still crediting John Broome and Gil Kane, but they are crediting me and Joe as
Hmm.
well. We still feel that we should get the full credit. I was a big John Broome fan. Gil Kane was a friend of mine. But the character they created is not the guy that's in
Hmm.
these movies, So um, that's an ongoing discussion with DC.
Now, are you credited with Kilowog?
Yes, yes, because there's no question, right? I mean,
Hmm.
and I've said for 40 years, if I had just not brought Guy Gardner back and just said, here's a new Green Lantern named Joe Smith, there'd be no problem. But DC, unfortunately, kind of likes to think of ways that they don't have to pay for things. And so they will seize on stuff like that to get out of paying. And they did for 40 years, I mean, it's ridiculous, but. that's what they did.
Now, for Green Lantern, I mean, you've had such a huge impact on Green Lantern as a title. Even your Justice League of America title, when you introduced the Manhunters, became
Mm.
a major facet of the Green Lantern's mythos going forward as the original. I guess they call them the original Green Lanterns, as it were, the Manhunters versus because but by the Guardians. Um, do you feel like Green Lantern is where you made your largest impact in the world comics? Do you feel it's more Captain America, Justice League? Do you feel it's Batman?
Yeah, well, I mean, I would say probably the biggest impact is Captain America and Batman. Both of them have gone on into the movies and basically followed the characterization that I gave them. Plus, I worked on the first Batman movie, blah blah blah. So, I mean, I think Batman and Captain America, but it remains to be seen about Green Lantern. I really love Green Lantern. I love the whole concept of the Green Lantern. And when the first movie came out, many people were unhappy with it. I was pissed off at it because I knew what could have been done, and
Yeah.
why, and why not. So I'm really hopeful that, that Green Lantern going forward can be rehabilitated, if that's the word, and become, you know, an equal player. I would love to be able to say that, that I got Green Lantern to where it needed to be or whatever.
Hmm.
If it gets there, it's going to be maybe because I started something, but it's going to be James Gunn who's going to, get
Hmm.
him there, get them there, all three of them. But yeah, no, of all the not, Superman never did much for me, I gotta say. Loved Batman, loved Green Lantern, and those are the two really that I got to, spend a lot of time on. I mean, relatively speaking. Um, and so I'm happy with all those. But if you're asking the biggest impact, it would be Captain America and Batman.
Now, go back just for a moment on Green Lantern, and I'm one of the people who was greatly disappointed with the film, for many reasons. However, what did Michael Clark Duncan voicing Kilowog? Did you feel that was true to the character? Do you feel, what do you think about that at least, that version of it?
Well, as a voice, I'm good with it. Whenever they try to make him more of a drill sergeant and forget that he's a super intelligent guy, um, I'm not in favor of it. And I haven't seen that movie since it came out the first time, so I don't really remember exactly how they played
Hmm.
him in there. But the voice is great.
So, talking about Batman, you wrote one of the most classic Joker stories of all time, The Laughing Fish, which was also adapted to the animated series, which is one of the most famous animated episodes of all time for Batman. It showed
Mm.
up in Detective Comics 475 and I believe it's 476. What was the key to writing a great Joker story? Because there's been so many of them, but the only few of them are classic.
Well, when I got there, he had been neutered for 30 years. I mean,
Hmm.
one of the things I really wanted to do in my time on Batman was bring back the whole pulp darkness aspect that was there in the beginning. And I did with Hugo Strange and the Monsters, but also there in that pulp era was a homicidal maniac Joker, who was the only character in all of, well, maybe not all of comics, hard to say, but he had continuity that every Joker story would end with him dying or being thrown in jail, and every Joker story would begin with him not quite dying or getting out of jail,
Hmm.
escaping. They kept that up until they started doing so many Batman stories they couldn't do it anymore. But all that had been lost. I mean, the homicidal maniac guy had turned into the guy who lived in the hacienda, and so that was part of what I wanted to bring in there. The other part was making Bruce Wayne a human being with Silver St. Cloud and so on.
Hmm.
That's a different aspect of it. But um, I really wanted to write the homicidal maniac guy. And once again, once people saw that, they go, "Oh, yeah, that's that's who we like." So um, now there's been, as you say, many, many Joker stories and all that, but he had been, as I say, neutered until we got there.
Now, one of the things the Joker says in issue 475 of the Laughing Fish storyline, he basically states that Joker must have a Batman. And
Hmm.
it was that the first time that was verbalized in the comic book because that's become an aspect between the two characters, at least for the Joker, that the Joker must have Batman and to feel fulfilled in his world of crime. Was that something that started with yours?
Again, I can't swear that nobody had ever said it before. It certainly seemed true to me. And so, once again, if I get credit for it, if I deserve credit for it, I'll take it. But I can't swear that it never was said before. But I just, I see them as two sides of the same coin, that Batman, my take on Batman, different from many other people's, but is that he drives himself right out to the edge of where a human being can go, and
Mm.
he has so much willpower that that's where he stops, right? He's everything he can possibly be, as full as he can possibly be, but not crazy. Not He doesn't go over the edge. He won't allow himself to go over the edge. Whereas the guy who went over the edge is the other guy. And and the fact that it's sort of supreme rationality versus supreme irrationality is what I see between those two.
In your opinion, as an authority on the Joker, as having written a great storyline, would the Joker stop at Batman? If he managed to kill Batman, would he stop then at that point? Would he have had enough?
Uh, that's a good question. I mean, I never really thought about it. I think the Joker, I mean, I just said this is how I look at these two. I don't know that Batman looks at it that way, but I think the Joker does. I do think the Joker sort of feels like I am so supremely crazy. I gotta have the supreme non-crazy person
Hmm.
to go against. And the other thing about the Joker that I like about him, he's crazy, but his plans work. I mean, he may say, "I want to rob a bank," and I want a pink pony wearing a tutu involved in it. And he'll make that work, right? I
Right.
mean, the plans don't fall apart because they're nuts. They work if he was getting there. Um, so the whole thing with the laughing fish, I mean, that was a perfectly, it made logical sense once you accepted the premise, which is, that's he accepted the premise. Other people didn't accept the premise, but um, yeah, I'm just getting inside that head, as I say.
Yeah, I kind of feel like a lot with the Joker. Some of the storylines they've started doing a lot with the homicidal aspect of him nowadays and the crazy aspect. But the part where it kind of needs to make sense to him and there's a genius behind what he does feels like sometimes gets lost in the wanting of the just chaos.
Yeah, yeah. And genius is a good word, I think. I mean, I don't never again never quantified it in my own head, but I think, yeah, he's extremely smart. Um, and he just is flamboyant. I mean, he's just beyond the pale in pretty much every aspect. But yeah, smart and sometime apparently in the dead of night he works out these plans which he then wants to implement.
It's kind of interesting to think that he just spends some of his free time just like sitting around, just like thinking about stuff. Because he always seems to be in action of
Yeah,
something.
yeah, yeah.
There also was a storyline. I can't remember who wrote it. It wasn't. It was. This is more recent. Where they had a thought. They kind of suggested that he wasn't as crazy as he made himself out to be crazy. Do you believe that, or do you think he is inherently crazy within a realm of his world would make? His world is rational. His actions are just plain out crazy, or do you think he's not as crazy as he plans things, or wants people think he is?
No, I think he's crazy. Again, I don't begrudge anybody else their shot at taking their, how they want to do the Joker, whatever. But so I don't know who did it, so I'm not dumping on that person. But I mean, it's like, no, I think the Joker is extremely crazy. Um, but crazy like a fox, like they say,
Hmm.
you know?
Well, I think like another character you created during this in your run that was very interesting. You mentioned was Silver St. Cloud.
Yeah.
There hasn't been many. functional romances in the history of Batman. They've done it recently with Catwoman, but beyond that, there's I can't think of many that were. I mean, even Vicky Vale wasn't really a serious effort.
Right. Right.
Um, so when you think of Silver State Cloud, how far, like, if you're continuous to work on it, how far did you see that relationship eventually going?
I don't have the answer to that actually because the one shot story, the first sequence where she can't deal with him and has to walk away, that was a way of settling that and ending, getting it all cleaned up before I left. Um, the second run where she comes back and they actually do go back together, um, seemed likely to me because I always envisioned her as a woman who could go with Batman. I mean, Catwoman can too, but I mean, you have to be pretty strong to want to hang out with Batman,
Hmm.
right? Um, and so there was a third series that has not been published, um, in which, well, I don't want to give it away because it might get published someday. But I mean, it's out there. Actually, if you want it, you can go to steveenglehart.com and download it. Look for Batman Dark
Okay.
Detective 3, and you can download it. But it's more of the relationship. And what I had been planning to do was a fourth run, um, that would sort of bring all that to a close. But I had never did the fourth run, so I don't really know what the close would be. She cannot end up with him, I mean, just like Catwoman couldn't. I mean, you can't have Batman with a wife. Doesn't scan for Batman. But I've already had a good reason for them to break up. So if they're going to break up again, I either better come up with another good reason
Hmm.
or figure out some other way to go forward. And again, I mean, there may be a way in which they could go forward together, but not until I'm called upon to write that fourth run will I know. Because again, that's the characters will tell me how that's all going to work out.
Well, as you mentioned, she was a strong woman in the world for Batman, and could have potentially had it worked out. Later on with Catwoman and Batman, the storyline, they were approaching a wedding, but then that had to be ended, and things, obviously moved on. Um, would that have permanently changed Batman if that wedding with Saint Cloud gone forward? Would it make sense for him to still be the obsessive Batman if he also had someone at home who was Silver St. Cloud?
It's a good question because if he's that, and I see him as being obsessive, and the guy who's that obsessive about being out on rooftops every night doesn't make for a good husband, as far as I can tell. Um, it's possible that she would accept that because she's a strong person in her own right and she's got her own life to live, and that they could make that happen. Um, but the idea of Batman dialing it back to become a more husbandly sort of figure, that I don't see at all.
And the other part that was kind of interesting and is especially when you had Silver St. Cloud knew who Bruce Wayne was Batman.
Hmm.
Um, how does that fundamentally change as well any potential relationship Bruce could have had when she knows that? Is that also something that eventually would have had to fall apart because she didn't does know who he is?
As I say, I don't know the ending of their story. But that was just something I thought, if you're sleeping with some guy, you kind of know what his chin looks like, and again, it's everything. So much of what I do, maybe not everything, but so much of what I do is just because it made sense. It's
Hmm.
like that's how that would work, I would think. Um, and so she was, she thought she was prepared to live with that, and then found out she couldn't. But then she came back again. So, I mean, it's like, has she learned how to make this work, or is this just another fling or whatever? I mean, I do not know.
I think one thing that you did that was so great with your comic books, including Batman and Super Saiyan Cloud, what we're talking about, is that you let the issues kind of breathe a bit. You
Mm.
have scenes of action, but then you let the characters be characters for. multiple pages. It's not just like a nod, a wink and a nod to, oh, he's now with this person for a panel or two. You let the story kind of breathe a bit. Do you think enough modern comics are letting these characters breathe enough?
Well, again, I can't speak to modern comics, so I don't know. But no, I mean, as I said, one side of what I wanted to do was crazy, dark, pulp, Joker monsters. And the other side was to, get to know Bruce Wayne better, the guy who's inside that suit, who is, as I say, extremely driven and not given to bearing his feelings particularly. But I found a way, I thought, to kind of let him do that. Um, and as far as breathing goes, I originally was supposed to do 7 issues. I had already made arrangements to go to Europe before Jeanette Kahn called me up and asked me to come do this stuff. Um, and it was going to be 7 issues. And the first few sold so well that they added another issue. And I had plotted it for 7 issues, but all of a sudden I had 8, which then meant that I could expand some scenes and reconfigure stuff. And I was really glad to do that. I would have told you the same story in 7 issues, but it wouldn't have had, scenes necessarily of them sitting in a restaurant thinking about stuff or whatever. But that's part of being characters. I mean, if you just kind of go, oh yeah, she's the girlfriend, then you've got Vicky Vale, who just is sort of there,
Hmm.
you know, when they need somebody to say girlfriend, right? Um, we don't know anything about, but I wanted you to know Silver St. Cloud. I wanted you to see why he would find her interesting. I wanted you to know him so she would find him interesting. And so uh, the scenes would have been shorter, I guess, but I would have tried to give you as much characterization of the people involved as I could, in space allotted.
Now, with Batman, you mentioned you want to create a grim, a darker Batman. We do agree that he's an obsessive individual. Does that aspect of the character work without you giving that other side of Bruce Wayne and that relationship to humanize him a little bit more? I mean, could you have just stayed in that realm without giving the other part, or are those both parts necessary to really make the character work?
Oh, well, I think they're necessary to make the character work, certainly. And again, if you can see him as a guy with a girl, with whatever, and that same guy puts on a suit and goes to the rooftops every night, you get a better sense of who he is, right? I mean, if
Mhm.
he's just on the rooftops every night, we love Batman. We love to see Batman on the rooftops every night, but you don't get very far in terms of who is that guy actually. And
Mhm.
that was, I wanted to do a little business on who is that guy.
Like like I said, I think you've done so many great runs of comic books, and at some point, if you want to come back, I would love to have to talk about some of the other runs that you've done. But I want to thank you for all the great comic books that you wrote that I got to enjoy.
Okay.
My first, actually, I don't think I didn't mention. So, like I said, I'm a huge Green Lantern fan, and where I broke into Green Lantern, my father found a bunch of issues it was a job lot, Ostate job lot, which was like they had a bunch of ones in a pile, and you could get it for like $3 for $1. And it was your
Mhm.
run of Green Lantern that
Mhm.
was around then. I was able to buy them up. Well, my father bought them up for me because they were, they had found a full run of them, and they just sucked me into it. I always want to thank you so much. And can you tell the listeners what's next for you?
Well, again, there might be some stuff coming out. When I retired from comics 20 years ago, I then wrote some novels, and since then, I've mostly been writing stuff that I find interesting as a writer, setting myself challenges and doing stuff with it without worrying whether I could sell it or get it done by a certain deadline or
Hmm.
whatever. Um, and I was perfectly happy doing that. Now I will say there's some interest from people about publishing some of that stuff. But it's all just talk at this point. And I was talking about the difference between new comics and old comics. When we started talking about it, I thought, okay, well, then we're going to do it. But then I found out that it's like, no, it's got to go through, marketing people, and it's got to go through this, and we got to do these things before we, actually say, yes, we're going to do it. So I think we're going to do it, but it's not nailed down. And so, we'll see. So there might be some stuff from me, or there might not. You
Well,
know,
like I said, Mr. Englehart, I want to just thank you for bringing so many great stories to me, and it's been an absolute honor to talk with you, sir.
happy to be here.
Have a good night, sir.